Hello and welcome to another episode of Transfer Nation, the video cast and podcast that highlights and celebrates and amplifies all things transfer. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by Eduardo Vasquez, who is a tenured faculty counselor at Barstow Community College. We're so excited to hear about his experience in advising and tips and insights he's going to offer. And he is just finished his qualifying exams for his EDD program. So he's very relaxed and relieved and is going to share with us a little bit about his journey to the EDD as a former transfer himself.
Welcome to the Transfer Nation videocast and podcast. Transfer Nation aims to create a network and community of educators who work with and advocate for transfer and post-traditional college students. Our mission is to build community, transform culture, and empower success for transfer educators and students by sharing resources and celebrating all things transfer.
So please join us in welcoming Eduardo to the show. Eduardo, fill us in on what this incredible role as a tenured faculty counselor at Barstow Community College is like. What is it all about?
No, I just want to say first, thank you, Heather, for giving me this opportunity to talk to everybody. And so just a little bit about my journey here. So I graduated way back from graduate school with Master's in Counseling back in 2005. And then it was a bit of a challenge to get into the community college system at that time in California because there was big budget cuts and everything. So I actually taught English abroad for 5 years. So I was teaching in South Korea for 5 years as an ESL instructor. And I worked at a university over there. And one of the reasons I decided that is because I already speak Spanish and English. So I wanted to have another language just to give yourself a little bit more than other people. Because in counseling, especially in California, is very competitive. So you have to have something that normally other people don't have, some sort of niche, some sort of, skill set that a lot of people don't have. And I think a lot of, especially new students or new people that want to get into counseling, don't really look at what makes them different, or they don't see their special attributes, something that they could bring in that other people may not be able to have that experience. And then also after that, I came back to the States. It took me a little bit of time, but since then I've been working 10 years in the community college system, luckily enough. 5 of those, I just got tenure last year, so that was very exciting for me. But before that, it was all part-time adjunct work. And so it was an experience that most people who work at community colleges have.
Thank you for that background. I really appreciate it because not everybody understands the kind of uniqueness of the community college system and the advising system and how to really break into that. We have a lot of grad students who are as part of Transfer Nation and really interested in breaking into that field and learning more about it. I know actually you just did a presentation for a graduate school program at CSU SB?
SB, correct? Yes.
Yeah. How was that? And what advice did you give to those graduate students who are trying to take the path that you're in?
So for my advice, I talk to the students a lot of times, and I think one of the important pieces of trying to get into a counseling role in the future is kind of finding your why and why are you doing this, because it's not an easy kind of position to sort of break into. And so, I think for me, it started way back in 2000 when I was a student. So I'll quickly share my screen real quick. And this was me back almost 20 years ago, which is pretty exciting. I know it's incredible.
Oh my goodness, I love it. Thank you for sharing that. That's genius. I love it. So
not
for
a
those
problem.
for those who can't see the screen and are listening on podcast, this is Eduardo's school ID from San Bernardino Valley College. It's great. It's a picture from fall 2000.
Exactly. So this has been 20 years now. I mean, it's pretty exciting to see that. And so, and that was at that time, I didn't really think I was going to go into working at the community college. I was going in more for sociology to be a social worker. But then when I went to I actually was working at the county for a bit. I felt that the best time of my education of my life, I don't want to say my life because I always think you should always every day should be the best day of your life. But I really did enjoy the time that I was at the community college. And so I felt that's where I can make the biggest difference in students' lives. So you have to be there for the right reasons. It's a lot of times people don't really see the profession as important, or they don't see the value in it because they've never really either they've never been a student, or they haven't had the best experience, I want to say, maybe with a counselor and advisor. So they don't see how important it is, if how much we make a difference in people's lives. And that's, I think, one of the biggest pieces is that, whatever advice, whatever counsel we give to students, this could potentially lead them into a very great opportunities, or we could, sort of not advise them correctly, and then it could lead them astray. So we have to make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons, I say.
And that's particularly true with transfer students, right? In community college, because it can be so complex, even in California, which has a great system. If you're not getting kind of the insights and the personal attention, kind of conversation that's really unique to the individual and what their path is going to be, it can really make or break the transfer experience for students. Do you find that?
Exactly. No, that is very true. And we have to sort of create those opportunities and those pathways to transfer, because I think a lot of times, I mean, as from my personal experience, I transferred to UCR, which is University of California, Riverside, because it was the closest UC to me. And if I were able to talk to myself 20, maybe 19 odd years ago, I would have told myself, you should have tried to apply for UCI, or UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara. Don't limit yourself to only one place. And so I think that's what we have to do as counselors a lot of times, is sort of create these more, let students know about these other options that they have. I mean, there's a lot of students that I work with that want to go into nursing, and it seems it's the most impacted program in the CSU system. And so I tried to let them know that you could go into respiratory therapy, you could go into radiology tech, you can go into become a registered dietitian. But I think a lot of times people aren't aware of what opportunities they have for themselves, because a lot of times we deal with a lot of first generation students. So I think that's very important to create those opportunities to transfer, for sure.
Absolutely. And having these conversations early is vital. If you're not having these conversations in high school, if you're not having these conversations at community college, by the time you're transferring to a 4-year, you're kind of set on a groove, and you haven't really explored what the right path for you is going to be. And you might put yourself in a situation like you were talking about, where you're putting all your eggs in one basket, but not exploring really what's going to be the best fit for you, for what you need, and the best options for you down the line.
No, for sure. And I think a lot of times people may have the impression that they came to the community college after high school because they were not ready to go to the 4-year. There could be various reasons for that, but they may get stuck into this belief system that the 4-year, the university isn't for them because they're community college students. So we have to, create that
break that stigma.
Yeah, break that stigma and let them know.
It's so ingrained sometimes, though. I know you see that. Yeah. Now, was your personal journey as a transfer student, and the counseling or the lack of counseling that you got, an inspiration for you then to further your education and get an EDD? What kind of instigated that? What was the inspiration behind your EDD journey?
So my EDD journey began with sort of the idea that, number one, I'm a bit of a completionist. I like to complete things, and I don't like to leave things, not done. And so I wanted to have something that I could take for me on a personal level, just for my family, my mom, my all my relatives, just to see that that I'm the first one of the first people born in the country, and then I've done a lot with me, but with that, but also that when you especially get a degree like an EDD, and then you get the doctor before your name, people sometimes do a little bit more and listen more than normal. I mean, it's very important to get a doctor. It's just to let people know that you have accomplished more than a lot of other people may have in the past, but also that you have greater insight, greater knowledge into that you could instill into different programs and different facets. I mean, being getting this EDD, one thing that I want to stress that I can see a lot of times in higher education in California, and this is probably a lot of times in many parts of the country, but there's a lot of community colleges in California. There's 116 community colleges and only 23 CSUs and 10 UCs. So it's sort of, we have this great system, but there's not enough input, there's not enough places for them to, or opportunities for them to transfer to, so that a lot of the private universities start jumping in. And so it's sort of, I want to sort of either, hopefully in the future, I would love to see some more degree completion programs, partnerships between community colleges and universities, or even more and that could be in a physical sense or in an online sense, because I think online education is something that we're lacking in California. And so we're getting a lot of schools from Arizona and other parts of the country coming to California to advertise their programs. So I find that interesting how that it's more out of state are doing more with that than California. And I think that especially some people may not need that quote unquote college experience. So they're they could be people with families, and or just maybe they're working, and so they don't have, when I was a transfer student, I remember at UCR, I was working at the county, but I had to quit the county job because that was 8 to 5, because my classes at UCR were between that 8 to 5 slot. So there was no way that I could be doing both at the same time. So I think that we need to sort of work at creating more opportunities for individuals who are actually working to get, attain a higher education versus the traditional 18-year-old that doesn't have those responsibilities so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% concur on that. How do you think that the pandemic and COVID has shifted things, if it has at all, in California in that manner? You were mentioning out-of-state schools that maybe have online programs and recruitment programs that have been really robust prior to COVID. Do you think that COVID has an effect on that and has changed anything in your experience of what you're seeing out there?
I would really hope that you have to always look for silver linings with situations. It's not the easiest. For me, I'm an avid traveler, and so I've been to about 25 different countries, and I love traveling. That's one of my passions. At this point, I can travel, but it gives me the opportunity to finish my dissertation, which again, that's a silver lining there. But in terms of with higher education, I think the pandemic has shown that especially the CSUs and UCs can do more with online education. It sort of forced that on them. So hopefully after the post-pandemic, we could see more of those programs being developed and maybe stronger partnerships with the community colleges. A lot of times, there are some programs that it'll be challenging to do in an online environment. I'm thinking a lot of the STEM programs with chemistry, biology, but other programs, there's a greater chance of them to be online. And that may also, in my mind, create more opportunities for building more jobs for individuals that want to go into higher education, because I think we're creating more access and equity by doing so. So if we have that the frame, and then not, we can learn from what's going on in the pandemic. We have to learn from it. We can't just treat it as something that it's not, something that we could always learn from it. That's what I'm trying to sort of get at.
Absolutely. Well, there's an opportunity here. I think, transfer it's always been important to prioritize and improve the transfer pathways and our work with transfer and community college partnerships. And I do think that this urgency that COVID has created in the kind of tumult and craziness of it all has created kind of a light and shone a light on some of these programs. And I do think that you're right. I think it's an opportunity for folks to really take a look at how we're serving transfer students and how transfer can be a social mobility path and really help fix some of those equity gaps that you talked about.
Exactly.
Now, I know you probably don't want to talk about your dissertation much because you just finished your qualifying exam, so you're probably relieved to not have to think about it. But are there areas of research that you're really interested in digging into? I'm assuming you're doing your dissertation on some part of the community college or transfer experience.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, I can't delve into it too much just because it's, we have to sort of, until it's done, then I can talk more.
Yes,
but
of course.
One of the focuses that I wanted to try to do, but it's going to be a bit of a challenge, is to try to see about where are the equity gaps in terms of transferring, and what is stopping students from transferring. I mean, there's a lot of different viewpoints of how that happens. I mean, when I'm working with students, there could be relationship issues, because that's often the case where somebody's looking about transferring, but then they get in a relationship and they don't want to transfer because the other person isn't transferring. So then that could be that, to me, that's something interesting. But also how a lot of times, especially the 4 years, the 4-year universities, advertise the cost and tuition, because I think that takes people away from, from transferring, because they think that the cost is too high, but they don't realize that that's a sticker price, and that a lot of times many students are eligible for financial aid, but they don't even make that leap because they see that big 18,000 a year or that 12,000 a year. So I think it's very important for especially the 4-year universities to do a better job at making it educating people about how that they could be eligible for financial aid, and they don't have to pay that whole cost. I mean, it's community colleges often talk about how they're free tuition, and students don't pay, and then they get usually some financial aid back. But technically, when I show students that they are actually paying tuition because it's $46 a unit, then it's kind of a revelation to them. But community colleges, I think, do a greater job of showing that it's affordable versus CSUs and UCs that automatically show the $18,000, so that students get deterred. And so I want to sort of focus on that too, about how, what are the messaging that students get that stops them from transferring.
Really terrific issues to delve into on the hurdles of transfer, because as we know, many students go into the community college system with a desire to transfer. Fewer actually transfer, and then sadly, even fewer graduate within 6 years with their bachelor's degrees. So I want to give you a minute, though, if there are other things that you wanted to mention about advising. You had mentioned to me that relationship building and relationships are sort of key, and I wondered if you talk a little bit more about that before we do our wrap-up questions.
No, exactly. So in terms of relationships, when you're working in higher education, you have to sort of see the importance of your role. Again, when I talk to people that want to go into counseling, and then I let them know that they have to sort of see themselves as somebody who's going to bring something to the institution, but also institutions themselves need to see how they are, their importance with the relationships with the 4 years, especially because a lot of times that when I hear I worked at Diablo Valley College, which is the number one transfer is the community college to UC Berkeley. When I hear those expressions or when people say things like that, I know the reason that for that happening was because the people at Diablo Valley College were talking to the people at UC Berkeley. So they were creating these relationships with one another. And I think a lot of times it starts with somebody who wants to do that sort of, who wants to start that dialogue, because it's so important for creating that relationship, brings in that sort of feeling that this institution is a good place to go to if you want to transfer to this school. And I think it gives that more aspiration for students to want to get done and want to get finished. So I think all of the relationships that we create with each other is so vital to help students, to have that encouragement to transfer, because then they're going to be looking out for your institution. They're going to be looking at and saying, oh, this is a good place to transfer. I mean, one of our college, I like to highlight that our articulation is great. We have a great articulation officer. And so, but if we don't have that relationship with especially our closer schools, because that's how community colleges usually work. So our closest ones would be UCR and Cal State San Bernardino. We do have a great relationship with UCI. So the UCI representatives come to our school and not try to, but they sort of promote their programs to our students so that, the students think about going to UCI as well. So I think if the people institution aren't speaking, or the institution to other institutions aren't speaking, then you're going to have more issues in terms of opportunities for students. It takes time and it's hard because, as somebody who's involved in a lot of different things, it's you have to sort of carve out that time, because a lot of times we become so insular that we're sort of not talking to other people, and that causes us to be ignored. And so the relationships between the institutions, and so like I say, go out and talk to the articulation officers, go talk to the transfer reps, to start building that relationship. So then when I work with a student, I know who the transfer rep is at Cal State San Bernardino, and I can tell the student to contact this person and say, Eduardo sent me. And so then, well, they're ready. There's more, how do I put it? There's more accountability on everybody. So now the student becomes more, empowered to seek out the help from the transfer to institution. Because I think that's also very important with counseling and advising. We have to help the students advocate for themselves, because a lot of times we want to give them all the answers, but that's not going to help them. They need to talk to the transfer institutions, because that way they're starting to build that relationship with a transfer institution. They're more aware of what's going to happen to them when they do transfer. So I think it's important. We can't I don't like to say this, but we can't coddle the student. We have to push the student and help them, encourage them to seek out the answers. And I think that's very important.
Well, it's building agency, right? It's
Yes.
helping the student figure out how to be that self-advocate. We can start out as their advocate, as the advisor. We hope to build agency and empower them to continue that down the line in case they don't meet another incredible transfer advocate like yourself in their next institution, or they need to figure out a way to really make a system work for them. That's terrific. Well, yeah, and you're right, that siloing is not particularly transfer friendly, right? Like, it's one thing to have an articulation agreement. It's another thing to have relationships backing that up, and really providing a bridge for the student, and a map and a guide and connection. You just talked about the most perfect ability as an advisor to be able to connect that
Yes.
student with another human being who can actually give them the answers they're searching for.
Exactly. No, it's that's so important. And I think sometimes we can help advocate for them, a lot of it, but they students have to build that agency, as you say.
Well, I think I know what your some of your answers are going to be these questions, but I want to know anyway. So I usually
Gotcha.
ask these in our transfer alumni interviews or our transfer student interviews. And since you're a transfer student, I'm curious to know what you'll say. So the first question is one tip or insight for students who are interested in transferring.
One tip or insight. I think the most important tip that I have is to do your research and find out what the university either has to offer in terms of a social life, because I think that's very, very important. Get yourself, know what kind of services they have for you as an individual when you go to that institution. But also in terms of transfer, make sure that your GPA is good, make sure that you're finishing all the classes that you do need to finish, but also look at see what other courses you're going to be taking in the future. I just think that's very important too.
Perfect. I love it. Okay, so in our uh, um, um, ever existent quest to end CC stigma, what is one thing that you wish educators and kind of the decision makers at schools knew about the transfer experience?
I think one of the best things, especially with the transfer experience, in California, we have the associate degree for transfers, the ADTs, and I'm sure that other states have similar programs. But I think the most important thing is that students, by coming to the community college, they're already gaining a very robust education, and then when they transfer, they do. I mean, I've had plenty of students who transferred in 2 years. Now they're in the graduate programs, and so I think that we need to sort of value community colleges. We have to sort of see them as a partnership, and they could. It's not stating that community colleges are not just for students who may not have the grades to go to a 4 year, but students, like myself, who wanted to just finish their first 2 years because they were a little bit unsure of what they wanted to do. And I think that helps out more students versus students who go to the 4 year directly out of high school and they are unsure, they don't do that well, and then they come to the community college and then it takes up more time. So I think that community colleges, if we have better relationships with the 4 years, we're not competing for students, but we're seeing each other as a potential ally with each other who could work together. I think it's extremely beneficial for the students, for the both institutions, because if I know there's a lot of programs at the 4 year that always have a lack of students because students aren't as aware. So if we could sort of build those relationships, and maybe some students from the community colleges may be excited to do that too. So I think that's very important.
It's a shared goal, right? A shared responsibility for workforce and career. At the end of the day, it's all about this journey to the BA, to the career, to, and we share that responsibility together. And so why not work together? I love that. Okay. In
Exactly.
that same theme, in that same thing, one thing that you wish society, families, people in the world understood about transfer.
So I think the most important thing is that transfer is an option. Students can transfer. It's sort of when you start at the community college and you're doing your first 2 years, those first 2 years go very quickly. So you want to make sure that you're prepared to know what schools that you're considering, but also that it's something that everybody, especially, in the, in California and the country, that this is an opportunity that students should be taking advantage of, because you start here, you finish there. It's not something that they can't do. All students can have that potential. So I think that it's a great opportunity for many students, and they could save a lot of money. They could also build those relationships with the instructors, because the community colleges are typically smaller classes than the 4 year institutions. And so I think that by having that agency, that know how to speak to instructors, when you transfer to a four-year university, I think, well, from my experience is that I would often go to the instructor's office hours, but I don't know how many other students had that, relationship with their instructors because they've only been in huge classes and they've only worked with themselves. And so I think the community colleges offer that. And in terms of transfer, it's a great model for people to be able to start here. Again, either when I was a student, I didn't get an associate's, but now it's important. Now, I actually did go back and I got my associate's degree, but now the associate's degrees are creating these opportunities, are connecting to the bachelor's degrees. And then, students get excited and they go for their master's and their doctorates as well. So I think the transfer helps springboard students into great heights.
Just like yourself. Eduardo,
course.
thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I've learned so much from listening to you and from your work, and I can't wait to have you back post dissertation so you can talk about all the amazing things you learned in your research. But thank you very much for your time today.
Not a problem. Thank you, Heather. You're doing great work, and I'm very happy about this Transfer Nation. I think it's hugely important, and as you're breaking down these stigmas and you're creating these partnerships, I think you're doing a lot of great work here.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. To continue the transfer conversation, be sure to join the Transfer Nation Facebook group at tinyurl.com/wearetransfernation. You can also follow us on Instagram at wearetransfernation and on Twitter at transferpride. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at tinyurl.com/tnationtube. If you have ideas for future episodes of the Transfer Nation videocast and podcast, please email us at wearetransfernation@gmail.com. We can't wait to continue celebrating all things transfer with you. And as always, in Transfer Pride.